Listen to me, old man. I make one call and you disappear. I have been sitting on this bench for 40 years. 40 years. Longer than many of the people in this room have been alive. Over those decades, I have seen just about everything a courtroom can hold. I have watched mothers collapse in tears when sentences were read. I have seen fathers stare straight ahead, hollowed out by shame or grief. I have seen young men and women who made one reckless choice, one terrible decision, and watched that single moment unravel their futures. Through it all, through every case that has crossed this threshold, I have clung to one unshakable belief: the courtroom is sacred ground. This is not just a room with wooden benches, a seal on the wall, and a flag standing quietly in the corner. This is where civilization draws its line. This is where society comes together and says there are rules, there are consequences, and there are boundaries that cannot be ignored, no matter who you are. Most people understand that the moment they walk through those doors, they feel it, they respect it. But every once in a while, and I thank God it's rare, someone enters this courtroom who doesn't understand that at all. Someone who believes power, money, or family connections place them above the law. Someone who looks at this bench, looks at me, looks at everything this courtroom represents and laughs. They don't just dismiss the process, they mock it. And when that happens, when someone shows that level of contempt for our justice system, it becomes my responsibility to remind them, and everyone watching, what real power actually looks like. Not the power of a famous last name, not the power of a limitless bank account, but the power granted by the people to this court to maintain order and deliver justice. Today is one of those days. The young man standing before me is named Diego Alejandro Salazar Ortega. He is 26 years old. According to the intake paperwork in front of me, and I am reading this directly, his listed address is the Four Seasons Hotel, Presidential Suite. Not an apartment, a hotel. The presidential suite, no less. That detail alone tells a story. This is not someone passing through town. This is someone who chooses to live in an $8,000 a night hotel room because he can, because money to him has lost all meaning. I look at Mr. Salazar Ortega standing there in his custom Italian suit. And yes, I know it's custom. I can see the silk lining when he moves. I can see the hand-stitched buttonholes. After 40 years on this bench, I know real craftsmanship when I see it. And what I also see is someone who has never been told no. Someone whose family name opens doors, whose calls are returned instantly, whose problems have always been resolved with a wire transfer or a quiet conversation with the right people. But here is what Mr. Salazar Ortega is about to learn. None of that matters here. I do not care who your family is. I do not care how many businesses they own, how many politicians they've supported, or what kind of empire they've built. In this courtroom, the only thing that matters is what you did, and whether you take responsibility for it. So let's be clear about why we are here today. According to the police report filed by Officer Michael Patterson, badge number 4721, a man who has served this community with honor for 16 years and supported by both dashcam and bodycam footage, on Saturday, November 11th at approximately 20:47 am, Officer Patterson observed a black Lamborghini Aventador traveling northbound on Riverside Drive. The license plate read UNTOUHBLE. Creative spelling aside, the message is unmistakable. The vehicle was clocked at an estimated speed of 104 miles per hour in a posted 35 mile per hour zone. Let me repeat that: 104 miles per hour. In a residential area, at nearly 3 in the morning. Some may think, at least the roads were empty. Were they? According to the report, Officer Patterson had just cleared an accident scene 2 blocks south. That means emergency vehicles were still in the area. Tow trucks, ambulances. First responders doing their jobs, helping someone who had already been injured that night. And then came Mr. Salazar Ortega, tearing through a neighborhood at triple-digit speeds in a vehicle worth more than most people's homes. Do you know what happens when a human body is struck by a vehicle traveling at 104 miles per hour? It doesn't matter if they're in a crosswalk. It doesn't matter if they're following every rule. Physics does not care about fault or fairness. That person dies instantly, and their family, their mother, their father, their children does not get a trial. They do not get an appeal. They do not get their loved one back. But we got lucky that night, didn't we? Officer Patterson activated his lights and siren immediately. It took nearly 2 miles before the Lamborghini finally pulled over. 2 miles of residential streets, 2 miles of uncertainty, 2 miles where the officer had no idea whether this was a drunk driver, a stolen vehicle, or someone fleeing something far worse. When the vehicle finally stopped in the parking lot of the closed Morrison Elementary School, Officer Patterson approached the driver's side window following standard protocol. Inside, he found Mr. Salazar Ortega, agitated, combative, refusing to lower the window more than 2 inches, and immediately insisting the officer had made a mistake. A mistake. No, Mr. Salazar Ortega, the mistake was yours. What happened next should have been routine. A standard request. The kind of interaction that happens thousands of times every single day across this country without incident. License. Registration. Proof of insurance. Simple. Predictable. According to Officer Patterson's sworn testimony fully supported by crystal clear body camera footage, Mr. Salazar Ortega did not comply. Instead of reaching for his documents, he reached for his phone. Standing there at the driver's side window, with a uniformed officer inches away, Mr. Salazar Ortega pulled out his cell phone and began making a call. Officer Patterson instructed him calmly, professionally to end the call and provide his documents. He made that request 3 separate times. You can hear it clearly on the recording. Sir, I need you to end the call and provide your license. No raised voice. No aggression. By the book. Mr. Salazar Ortega's response was not verbal. He raised one finger. One finger held up in the universal signal for wait. He held it inches from the window, directing it at a law enforcement officer conducting a traffic stop, as though Officer Patterson were a waiter interrupting a private dinner conversation. Let me be absolutely clear about the circumstances here. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. Officer Patterson was standing alone on a dark roadside, next to a vehicle that had just been traveling at speeds capable of killing anyone it struck instantly. He had no way of knowing whether there were weapons in that car. He did not know whether the driver was impaired. He did not know whether the driver had outstanding warrants, whether he intended to flee again, or whether that phone call was summoning backup of a very different kind. Every traffic stop is dangerous. Every single one. Officers are trained to treat them that way because hesitation can cost lives. Officer Patterson has a wife. He has 2 daughters. He has the same right as anyone else in this room to go home safely at the end of his shift. And there he stood, being told to wait while a spoiled, entitled young man finished a phone call. But it did not stop there. After the 3rd request, after exercising a level of restraint that frankly amazes me, Officer Patterson informed Mr. Salazar Ortega that he needed to exit the vehicle. That is when the call ended. Mr. Salazar Ortega lowered his window a few inches more and said something. Something that was documented in the report. Something captured on body camera. Something I have personally watched and listened to 17 times to ensure there was no mistake. He looked directly at Officer Patterson and said, "I make one call and you disappear. I make one call and you disappear." Let those words settle. This was not shouted in anger. This was not a frustrated outburst. This was calm, measured, deliberate. A threat delivered with the confidence of someone who truly believes it carries weight. In 40 years on this bench, I have heard threats of every variety. I have heard defendants threaten witnesses, lawyers, judges, even me. But there is something uniquely chilling about this one. Mr. Salazar Ortega was not threatening a punch or a vandalized car or some petty act of retaliation. He was implying something darker. He was asserting that he, or more accurately, his family, possessed the kind of power that makes people disappear. Power that operates outside the law. Power that bypasses accountability. Power that is the very reason courts like this exist. And what did Officer Patterson do? He did exactly what we expect of a professional law enforcement officer. His voice did not shake. He did not escalate. He stated clearly and firmly, "Sir, step out of the vehicle now, or I will add failure to comply to your charges." That was it. No threats, no bravado, just the law. Mr. Salazar Ortega laughed. You can hear it on the body camera audio. A short, dismissive laugh. Then finally he exited the vehicle, but even then he did so carelessly, leaving the engine running and the driver's door open. He walked around to the passenger side and opened that door, prompting Officer Patterson to brace for the possibility of a weapon. What Mr. Salazar Ortega retrieved was a wallet, a Hermes wallet for those keeping score. From that wallet he produced a Mexican driver's license, invalid for operating a vehicle in this state without an international driving permit, which he did not have, and a credit card. Not registration, not proof of insurance. A black American Express card. He held it up and said, "How much?" As if justice were a toll booth, as if the law had a price tag, as if accountability could be swiped away with enough credit limit. Officer Patterson explained, again with remarkable patience, that payment was not an option. Salazar Ortega was being cited for reckless driving, excessive speed, and threatening a peace officer. He was instructed to sign the citation. Mr. Salazar Ortega refused. "I don't sign things I haven't reviewed with my attorney," he said, as though this were a corporate merger rather than a traffic citation. Officer Patterson explained, clearly and correctly, that signing is not an admission of guilt, only a promise to appear in court. Mr. Salazar Ortega responded by getting back into his Lamborghini, engine still running, and attempting to close the door. At that moment, Officer Patterson had no choice, none. He opened the door and informed Mr. Salazar Ortega that he was under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order. And then came the second phone call. As Officer Patterson attempted to place him in handcuffs, for everyone's safety, Mr. Salazar Ortega made another call, speaking rapidly in Spanish. That call, too, was recorded. That call, too, was later translated, and what it revealed only confirmed what this courtroom already knows. This was not a misunderstanding. This was entitlement colliding with the rule of law. Because of the seriousness of what was said, I ordered that a certified translator be brought in. I wanted precision. I wanted accuracy. I wanted to know exactly what words were spoken, with no room for interpretation or assumption. According to the official translation submitted to this court, Mr. Salazar Ortega said the following while being placed under arrest. "They're arresting me." "Yes, the police. I need you to call Carlos. Tell him to handle this. Tell him I said the cop's name is Patterson. Badge Forsen 21. Let that sink in." While being handcuffed, while standing on the side of the road, after threatening a police officer, this defendant calmly read the officer's badge number into his phone. He took the time to identify Officer Patterson by name and badge number so that someone else could handle it, so that this problem, this officer, could disappear, just as he had promised minutes earlier. Officer Patterson completed the arrest without incident. That fact alone speaks volumes. Most people would have reacted differently when faced with a direct threat to their life and career. He did not. He followed procedure. He remained professional. He did his job. Mr. Salazar Ortega was transported to the county detention facility and processed. And here is a detail from the booking report that I want everyone to hear carefully. When asked for an emergency contact, he listed a phone number with a +52 country code Mexico. When asked for his occupation, he wrote, investment consultant. That's the term he chose, investment consultant. Bail was set at 50,000, which is entirely standard given the charges reckless driving, excessive speed, threatening a peace officer, and failure to comply. Now let me ask you this, how long do you think Mr. Salazar Ortega remained in custody? 47 minutes. 47 minutes from booking to release, not because a bondsman posted 10%, no, because someone wired the entire 50,000 bail amount, every dollar, within the hour. We have the records. Most people can't get a pizza delivered that quickly. Mr. Salazar Ortega had $50,000 transferred to the county bail system before the ink on his fingerprints was dry. He walked out of the detention facility at 4:51 a.m. Security footage shows him getting into a black Mercedes G-Wagon that was already waiting. And according to a parking citation issued 3 hours later, he went straight back to the Four Seasons Hotel, where his Lamborghini had been impounded. That parking citation, by the way, was issued because the G-Wagon was left in a fire lane, engine running, with no driver present. But that is, as they say, a matter for another day. What truly troubles me begins after that. After making bail, Mr. Salazar Ortega did not lay low. He did not call a lawyer to begin preparing his defense. He did not reflect on how close his actions came to ending someone's life. Instead, he went on social media, Instagram specifically. His account, which has over 200,000 followers, is filled with images of private jets, luxury cars, yachts, casinos, and champagne bottles that cost more than some families earn in a month. And that same evening, he posted a photograph, a mirror selfie taken in what appears to be his hotel suite. The caption reads exactly as follows: "Small town cops don't know who they're messing with. Mosquitoes get swatted, is untouchable, is above your pay grade, G. Solar's empire. Mosquitoes get swatted." He compared Officer Patterson, a 16-year veteran of law enforcement, a husband, a father, a man who puts on a uniform every day, knowing he may not come home, to a mosquito, and he broadcast that message to 200,000 people, including presumably whoever he called that night, including whoever Carlos is, including whoever he believes has the power to make people disappear. Do you understand the level of arrogance we are dealing with here? Do you understand what this tells me about this defendant's character? About his values? About his complete and utter contempt for the rule of law? He committed serious crimes. He was arrested. He posted bail. And within 12 hours he was online bragging, mocking the justice system, and issuing public threats against the officer who held him accountable. But it does not end there, because something about this case did not sit right with me. I assigned an investigator. The investigation was lawful, limited to public records, and entirely appropriate. And here is what we discovered. Diego Alejandro Salazar Ortega is the youngest son of Ernesto Salazar Cruz. According to multiple international news sources and publicly disclosed DEA intelligence reports, Ernesto Salazar Cruz is suspected of being a high-ranking member of the Galileo New Generation cartel. Now let me be very clear. Ernesto Salazar Cruz has never been convicted of cartel-related crimes in the United States. On paper, he is a legitimate businessman with interests in real estate, agriculture, and import-export enterprises. But the allegations exist, the investigations exist. And when you look at the threats, the money, the influence, and the belief that problems and people can be erased with a phone call, a pattern begins to emerge. Before defense counsel rises to object, and I note for the record that Mr. Richard Kensington of Kensington and Rothschild, one of the most expensive defense firms in this state, is present, I will say this plainly: I am not punishing this defendant for his father's alleged conduct. I am punishing him for his own, for driving 104 miles per hour through a residential neighborhood, for threatening a police officer, for refusing lawful orders, for attempting to buy his way out of accountability, for using wealth and influence to mock this justice system publicly. These are his actions. These are his choices. And these are his consequences. But the family connection tells me something important. It tells me that when Mr. Salazar Ortega said, "I make one call and you disappear," he wasn't bluffing. He believes it. And you know what? In certain parts of the world, under certain circumstances, he might be right. There are places where money erases consequences, where influence rewrites the rules, where a single phone call truly can make a problem disappear. But not here. Not in my courtroom. Not in this country. Not while I am wearing this robe. Earlier today, Mr. Kensington stood before this court and described his client as a young man who made a mistake. A mistake. Let's be clear about something right now. This defendant is 26 years old, not 16. He is not a confused teenager. He is a fully grown adult who made a series of calculated decisions. He chose to drive at lethal speeds through a residential neighborhood. He chose to threaten a police officer performing his lawful duties. He chose to flaunt his wealth and connections on social media while under active criminal charges. These are not mistakes. These are deliberate choices, choices that reveal character, choices that tell this court exactly who this defendant is. Mr. Kensington also argued that the threatening language was taken out of context, that it was somehow lost in translation, that his client's English is imperfect and the officer misunderstood what was meant. Really, his English seemed perfectly adequate when he was posting captions on Instagram. It seemed perfectly adequate when he calmly read Officer Patterson's badge number into a phone call. And it seems perfectly adequate right now as he stands before me understanding every word I am saying. No, counselor, this was not a translation issue. This was your client showing his true colors. Then came the attempt to minimize the speeding itself. I heard arguments about radar calibration, about speedometer discrepancies, about empty roads and minimal danger. Let me address those claims directly. First, the radar gun used that night was calibrated in accordance with the law, and the certification is in evidence. Second, when someone is traveling 69 miles per hour over the posted limit, I do not care what their speedometer claims. And third, and this is the argument that truly troubles me, the suggestion that because no one was hit, the conduct was somehow less serious. Officer Patterson was on that road. Emergency crews responding to an earlier accident were nearby. Any one of them could have stepped into the street. Any one of them could have been killed. But even beyond that, the absence of a victim does not erase recklessness. If someone fires a gun into a crowded room and, by sheer luck, no one is struck, we do not shrug and say, "No harm, no foul." The recklessness itself is the crime. But what keeps me awake at night about this case is not just the speed. It is the threat, because that threat reaches far beyond a single traffic stop. It strikes at the heart of our justice system. If police officers can be intimidated without consequence, if wealth and connections can scare law enforcement into silence, then we no longer have laws. We have suggestions. We have a system where justice depends on your bank balance and your last name. And that is something I will not and cannot allow. Officer Patterson could have walked away. When Mr. Salazar Ortega made that first threat, when he said, "I make one call and you disappear," Officer Patterson could have thought about his wife, his children, his career. He could have decided that this was not worth the risk. He could have said, "Slow it down next time," and driven off. No one would have known. No one would have blamed him. But he did not. He did his job. He enforced the law even when it would have been easier, and perhaps safer, to let it slide. And that is what makes Officer Patterson a hero. Not the kind of hero who appears in movies or receives parades, but the kind who holds the line when it is difficult, when it is frightening, when doing the right thing comes at a personal cost. Which brings us to the moment that truly defines this case. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Salazar Ortega appeared in this courtroom for his arraignment, a routine proceeding. Enter a plea, set dates, usually over in 10 minutes, but not this time. As I began reading the charges, when I reached the count involving the threat against a peace officer, the defendant interrupted me, interrupted a sitting judge in open court. He looked directly at me and said, "You are too poor to judge me. I have been called many things in 40 years on this bench. I have been accused of being unfair, too harsh, too lenient. I have been cursed at. I have been threatened. My intelligence, my integrity, my competence have all been questioned at one time or another. But never, not once, has anyone suggested that my economic status disqualifies me from dispensing justice, as though justice only has value when delivered by the wealthy, as though the rule of law depends on net worth." In that moment, I took a breath. I took that breath because I wanted to be certain that whatever came next would be guided by facts and law, not anger. It would have been easy to let that contempt, that arrogance, that mockery of everything I have dedicated my life to influence my judgment. But that is not who I am, and it is not what this robe represents. So I continued reading the charges. I asked for the plea. Through his attorney, the defendant pled not guilty. I set a trial date, and I informed him that he would return to this courtroom today for sentencing on the charges he could not possibly contest, because the evidence is overwhelming. And now we are here. Before I announce the sentence, I want to speak to the young people who may be watching, who may hear about this case. Mr. Salazar Ortega believes power comes from money, from connections, from family names and phone calls that make problems vanish. And in a twisted way, that is a form of power, the power of fear, corruption, and intimidation. But it is not real power. Real power is what Officer Patterson showed that night. Real power is not loud. It does not boast, and it does not threaten. Real power is the ability to do the right thing when doing so is difficult. It is the strength to face intimidation and still enforce the law equally, without regard to wealth, influence, or fear. That is the power our founders understood when they created a justice system meant to be blind. A system where it does not matter whether you are the son of a teacher or the son of a cartel boss. Where your rights are the same, your obligations are the same, and the consequences of your actions are the same. I want to speak directly to the parents who may be listening, because at some level, this case represents a failure of guidance. Somewhere along the way, Mr. Salazar Ortega was taught by words spoken or by silence that he was above the rules that govern everyone else. He was taught that consequences are negotiable, that respect can be purchased, that accountability can be avoided with enough money or influence. That is not success. That is tragedy. I have seen the other side of this courtroom. I have watched parents who work 2 jobs, who skip meals to keep the lights on, who struggle just to afford school supplies, and their children stand before me with humility, responsibility, and respect, more character than this defendant has shown at any point in this case. The difference was never money. It was values. It was priorities. It was parents teaching their children that actions have consequences. So here is what this court is going to do. I am going to exercise the power entrusted to me by the people of this state, not the power of money, not the power of intimidation, but the power of law, the power that says we are a nation governed by rules, not by men, and I am going to make it unmistakably clear to Mr. Salazar Ortega that no matter who your father is, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many followers you collect online, in this courtroom and in this country, you are not above the law. On the charge of reckless driving, I find you guilty. You are sentenced to 6 months in the county jail. No work release, no house arrest. 6 months behind bars to reflect on what it means to gamble with innocent lives for the thrill of speed. On the charge of excessive speed, 69 miles per hour over the posted limit, I impose the maximum fine of $2,500 and an additional 6 months in jail, to be served consecutively. That brings the total to 1 year. On the charge of threatening a peace officer, the most serious offense in my view, you are sentenced to an additional 2 years in state prison. Officer Patterson deserves to go home safely to his family. Every officer in this community deserves to perform their duties without fear of retaliation from criminals who believe they are untouchable. That brings your total sentence to 3 years of incarceration. Your driving privileges in this state are suspended for 10 years. You will not operate a motor vehicle here, and if this court ever learns that you have driven in this state before those 10 years expire, I will ensure that you serve every single day of the maximum sentence allowed for driving on a suspended license. You are ordered to pay $25,000 in restitution to Officer Patterson for the emotional distress caused by your threat while he was performing his lawful duties. You will pay an additional $10,000 to cover the costs of this investigation. Upon your release, you will complete 500 hours of community service working with at-risk youth in this community. If you are capable of teaching anything at all, it will be the importance of respecting the law and the people tasked with enforcing it. There is one final condition, and it is one I hope truly reaches you. You are ordered to write a personal, handwritten letter to Officer Patterson, not something drafted by your attorney, not a public relations statement, a real letter. You will explain what you have learned, how you have changed, and why his life matters. That letter will be reviewed by this court before your release. If I do not believe it is sincere, you will remain in custody until you can write something authentic. Additionally, I am forwarding all evidence in this case, including the translated phone calls, your social media posts, and your statements made in open court, to the United States Attorney's Office and to the DEA for further review. Threatening a law enforcement officer while invoking family connections to criminal organizations may constitute federal crimes. That determination is no longer within my control. You came into this courtroom and told me I was too poor to judge you. You were right about one thing. I am not wealthy. I do not live in luxury suites. I do not drive exotic cars or vacation on yachts. I drive an old Honda. I live in a modest home. I shop in the same grocery stores as everyone else in this community. But you were wrong about what matters. My lack of wealth makes me exactly the right person to judge you, because I cannot be bought. I cannot be intimidated. I do not care about your money, your family name, or your online following. I care only about the law, and the law says you are guilty. The law says you are going to prison. Bailiff, remand the defendant into custody. Court is adjourned.